coming. Over to Jane.
Over to Jane.
Yes, hello. Good. Welcome, everybody. I'm really pleased to be back for this, our second ALL consultation on Ofqual's proposals. I'm going to just talk about the format for the evening, which is that we're going to have a presentation from Helen, who is very well known to you as chair of the All London branch and a trustee of ALL, and David, who I'm sure is equally well known for all the work he's done for languages over the year and for Ofqual. I just want to, before we start, I just want to give apologies from our president, Kim Bauer, who unfortunately is not able to be with us this evening, though she would very much like to have been. And before I hand over to Helen and David, just to remind you to please keep using the chat during the presentation. Rinny and I will be monitoring it, and we will put the points together. So we hope everybody will be able to get their answers to whatever they have in mind as things come up during the evening, or indeed things that you want to ask already. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over, I think, to David first, who's going to start the presentation, and then he and Helen will be working together to take us through the background and what's actually we're being consulted on this time by Ofqual. So over to David.
Lovely. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this presentation. And next slide.
Oh, I'm in charge of slides, right?
Sorry. Just to begin by saying that we gave a presentation back on the 10th of July when the consultation came out about the proposals in the first place. And some of the slides that we're going to go through initially are very similar to those from that presentation, but we felt it was worth going through it so as to give everybody an overall context as to how we've got to where we've got today. So the first thing to stress is who has responsibility for what. And this did actually come to the fore in August over the grading issue, but it's important to realise that it's the Secretary of State for Education and the DfE that actually specify the curriculum and the overall assessment approach and set a direction and a framework for Ofqual. Ofqual is the independent exams regulator, which is responsible to Parliament, and their role is to maintain standards and to oversee the work of the exam boards. The exam boards themselves are commercial organisations who then have to respond to the framework from Ofqual and from the DfE, and what they do is then regulated by Ofqual. So just going back in time, and it does seem an awful long time ago, back on the 18th of June, the Secretary of State wrote formally to Ofqual to ask them to look at the exams for 2021. So he's setting out the departments and his broad policy objectives, and then was asking Ofqual to advise on what he was looking for. What he was saying was that he wanted to make sure that the students had as much time as possible in the classroom, recognising that many of them had actually lost time. What he did also say was that he was not minded to change the content. And it is the DfE that control the content, not Ofqual. And that was a key point in that consultation, although there were some minor changes that Ofqual were able to do. What they were looking for really was an adaptation to the assessment in the context of the pandemic, and in particular around getting children back into the classroom for as much time as possible. It allowed the approach to differ by subject and at GCSE and A level. And then this was the deep irony, was that he was saying that the outcomes were to be similar to grading in previous years. Well, we all know what happened when they panicked the evening before the A-level results came out. What's going to happen in 2021? Well, helpfully, Ofqual sent a blog out on Monday, and I've given the link there, and which they made it very clear that the autumn series is going to be generously graded in line with the final gradings for 2020, and they have not committed to what standard is going to be there for summer 2021, and Nick Gibb at the Education Select Committee hinted that they may be doing something with the grading. So it really is watch this space. What we will be trying to be pressed really hard for is that the changes to severe grading that took so long to get into place are still enacted in any subsequent series. So this is back in July. Ofqual launched the consultation 3rd of July. We gave the presentation on the 10th of July, and the closing date it was a very short turnaround. The results were analysed and fed back, and what they were looking for was these sort of general questions for all subjects, and then looking for subject-specific ones about freeing up teaching time, and also taking account of any public health issues which particularly affected things like drama, music, and perhaps speaking in languages. So the proposal that was made in July was that the examination part should continue for listening, reading, and writing, but the spoken language should be an endorsement alongside the 9-to-1 grade. Separately, there was an issue around the removing the requirement around vocabulary, but making sure that the grammatical knowledge was still as it was. So the key thing there was around reducing the pressure on teaching time by relaxing those requirements. So that was a consultation. As you can see, there was a fantastic level of response. Nearly 30,000 responses went in. And if you want to, again, I've put the links there so that you can actually see the detailed analysis of that, including quotes from a range of views. The decisions from that, and they were decisions, were published on the 3rd of August. So let's have a look at those policy decisions as far as GCSE modern languages was concerned, because one of the decisions was that A-level languages would continue as previously. So the first decision was that the spoken language assessment should be an endorsement, and they decided that it should be on a 3-point scale against common assessment criteria, and really importantly that it was to be assessed by teachers during the course of study. And there was an explanatory note that we'll be coming back to several points through this, highlighting that the speaking skills should be assessed, but in an integrated way that supports classroom practice. So there's no need to have separate formal assessment arrangements. The purpose of this was to reduce the disruption within a centre and to increase the amount of teaching time available for languages. And then those were the decisions around the other 2 points, which again aren't particularly controversial, so we just focus on the speaking part. And now I'd like to pass over to Helen, because we want to give some examples, and I'm stressing these are examples of how you can be assessing speaking skills in an integrated way that supports classroom practice. So I'll pass over to Helen at this point.
So as David said, we thought it would be useful to give one example drawn from my personal experience as to both the thinking process, but also some practical ideas, with the hope that that might give people something to think about for your own situation, what might work for you. So this slide just shows what my personal teaching situation is with regard to year 11. I've got 2 classes, one on timetable and one off timetable after school. During lockdown, I used Microsoft Teams and Class Notebook. There were some optional online sessions live using Zoom as well. And since September, we've been really lucky in that we haven't had any interruption. So I've had a timetable class in school, which has been in a computer room, again using Teams and Class Notebook. And I have my lessons. I've decided rather than having them after school, I'm carrying on having them online every week using Teams and Class Notebook. So that's my situation. So this is an expansion of what we were saying earlier on, that spoken language assessment then should take place during normal teaching and learning rather than the one-off performance. And that criteria are to be used. There's no requirement to set up a centre devised speaking test. So that being the context, what might we think of being normal teaching and learning? And I recognise that things are anything but normal at the moment. So this may seem a real challenge in the current climate. But I thought it might be helpful to categorise. I know a lot of people have been talking about this already, but to categorise the sort of activities which might normally take place in a classroom, and then perhaps invite others to join in, perhaps write in the chat any of their own experiences. And of course, whenever these are decided, the criteria, that would be something where ALL will be supporting the exam boards and anybody else in giving guidance as to how can we give pupils opportunities to speak. Because that's the thing, isn't it? That's the most important thing, is that they just have to have opportunities to speak. We don't need evidence of what they actually do, but they must have these opportunities. And it's a given that different schools will be operating under very different conditions and restrictions, which themselves may vary from day to day or from week to week within the school itself. So I do realise that not everything is going to work for all. So it's about possibilities, and here are the 4 types that I've categorised things. So if I just give you a list really for each one of these. Firstly, the classroom routines. This is something where, you know, year 7, I'm always very, very keen, give them all out sheets. We're all going to do everything in the target language. I'll be honest, sometimes when it gets to year 11, we're so focused on the exam that those sort of things sort of slip a little bit. But it's obviously a really good opportunity to pick up on what pupils can do by using the target language in your classroom routine. So yesterday, first lesson with my year 11, when Salvo bounced in and asked me how I was using the target language, I announced to everybody, well, Salvo's, you know, well on his way probably to getting a merit or even a distinction in his speaking, if it comes up with something like that, just volunteering something. So I'm expecting to get flooded with people asking about how I am now every lesson. But certainly, you know, there are things which you can see there, the ideas which we all know, where if you can encourage children to be able to, especially take the initiative in speaking and using the target language, it's a no-brainer. It will give you evidence of how they are. Things like getting the pupils to take the teacher role as well, if possible. So lots of ideas there. This is the bit that's actually written in the proposals, that they note that the listening, reading and writing is going on as before. So therefore, speaking activities can be integrated into the teaching and learning of those skills in order to develop the skill of speaking in its own right. And I would say that's something we do anyway, don't we? Of course, we use speaking. We don't develop these skills separately. So the next slide just has, again, a list of the sorts of things that you'd be doing, even if they do it, the task is listening, reading or writing. You could well be, they could be eliciting information, finding out information from you, clarifying which page is it, what are we doing? You check comprehension in the target language, and that's something you have to do anyway, because for the listening and the reading, there are always questions in the target language, on the target language. Whatever one might think about that, they are there. So we have got to prepare them for that. And of course, the writing as well, the instructions are in the target language. So it's obvious that we're going to be still using the target language. And other ideas, like obviously they're going to have to do their writing, whether it's doing bullet points, 90 word, 150 word. When you're giving them instruction on that, you'll be doing that in the target language, eliciting from them what sort of language can we use. So you'll be hearing them speaking French at that point. So ideas there as to what you would be doing anyway. This is another one which I personally am going to carry on with. I find that the exam type tasks are actually very useful for supporting language learning. You know, so obviously that approach will be different, because there won't be this constraint of making them demonstrate everything they know in a 7-minute or a 12-minute slot. But I still feel that there are things there which, you know, I've already got resources for it. I'd already been preparing them for this. We prepare for them, don't we, in Key Stage 3. It's not just at the beginning of year 10 we start doing these things. So we'll always, by March, I'd already got some idea as to what they were like by using these activities. So there you've got your role play. You know, that's something where Dr. Rachel Hawkes always talks about the importance of training children to be able to ask a question, in that if they can ask a question, then they'll understand much better. So role play I would see as being something which is a nice structured way of ensuring that they do have that opportunity to ask questions. When we look at the criteria later, it particularly asks them to ask questions in different styles. Describing a picture as well, quite satisfying to do that. Is what I did when I took the kids to the Musée d'Orsay last February. And as far as conversations are concerned, again, we all do it, don't we? It doubles up as preparation for writing. So that's something which, you know, certainly I'm sure mine and yours will have already started filling in some sort of booklet with the sorts of ways that they could prepare those answers. They'd already done the theme 1 by March, and I've just carried on with that anyway. And then I know that for some exam boards, they have presentation. And obviously the communicative part of Communicate and Interact gives somebody a chance to be able to demonstrate their pronunciation, even if it's just a monologue. And then the 4th category that I've just created is how you can perhaps, you know, really give opportunities for authentic communication. I know that Stephen Fawkes will be the greatest fan of this category. He's always been saying how, you know, we should be looking for the authentic things where you can be playful with language. And obviously there are all sorts of things there. I just was looking at my shelves there and digging out the sort of books that I've got on the ways in which you can get people playing games, using language, interacting. There are creative things there. All of this, I totally understand. And I've said at the beginning, I know that different people will be in different situations as to how much they're allowed to speak, but there are some people who are in this position where they can be doing this. And indeed, you can be doing it online as well. Just recently, I saw someone sharing a lovely game that could be done online. And they've even put there, yes, who knows, it could be that some people do Zoom with a partner school and can be doing some speaking that way. So those are really those 4 categories. And then I was also thinking about the fact they were saying it would be good to obviously share the criteria with the pupils. And it reminded me of some training that I had ages ago, and some of you might remember these, where we were encouraged to deliberately have, say, a 10 or 15-minute slot in our lesson where we just talked about things that we wanted to talk about. And the encouragement was make children tick off a list when they have taken a risk, when they've created a phrase, when they've done something where they've adapted the language. So that was just a little idea that I had there. I think there's one other slide on this as well. Yes, I've already mentioned this. You know, well, I am a great fan of tech. Loads of ideas. If you are fortunate enough to be able to have access to technology, a whole host of apps and programs which you could use for encouraging interaction.
Lovely. And can I just say before we go on to these that the recording will be shared later, and the PowerPoint and some of the notes, so don't worry about it. Everything will be available on the ALL London website later on this evening, and then transferred over to the ALL national one. And I hope you already got a flavour that actually these do offer an opportunity to language teachers, that if you're a little bit canny in terms of you're saying to the students that this is going to be assessed, actually you can be in a normal classroom encouraging them and incentivizing them to speak in as natural a way as possible. So we're perhaps encouraging people to look on this as an opportunity, particularly, as I say, there is an endorsement that will go on to a certificate at the end. But let's just go back for a moment and look at the enormous challenges which schools and teachers are facing. I think many of the people in the audience tonight will be utterly exhausted with coping with all the extra challenges and everything in school. And we know that maybe sudden local lockdowns, different parts of the country, the DfE's attendance statistics have shown that 20% of secondary schools are not fully open on any one day. We've got the autumn series that's starting for GCSE after half-term. A-levels already underway, but there won't be any NEA for that, so there won't be a speaking test in languages. And we just don't know how things are going to be operating through the rest of this year. So again, as far as speaking is concerned, doing things in the normal classroom will mean that part is not going to be subject to the stress of the exams in June. What about the actual exams themselves? We've seen quite a lot of controversy at a national level as to how that should be, which I don't want to get into at this stage, but just to highlight some of the questions thinking ahead. We know that Year 11 pupils had very different experiences. Some actually probably covered as much as they would have done otherwise, and with the additional teaching may actually be further advanced when it comes to exams than they would have been normally. Others will have had very limited experience during lockdown. We also won't be able to assume that all the pupils will be able to sit the exams, what's going to happen there. And we already know that the GCSE exams are going to be starting 3 weeks later on the 7th of June 2021. It is a very compressed timetable and a compressed marking schedule. So I have to say I do foresee some problems around that, but that's decision's been made and the results are going to be published very late, Friday the 27th of August. Again, those are announcements that have already been made. I've picked up around the grading issue, so I don't need to go into that at the moment. So Ofqual made their decisions that were announced in August, and they then said that they were going to publish the criteria. And I've put the link for the criteria there in the bottom left of the slide. I saw some people were asking about that. That's the link to it. It was published on the 12th of October, and they're not consulting on the policy decisions. Those decisions have been made. What they're consulting on are the criteria and other details around the way that those policy decisions are going to be implemented. The consultation closes 11:45 on the 26th of October, although Renee has actually given an extra 24 hours out of Ofqual because of a mistake they made on date. So actually it's up to the 27th of October, although you won't see that on their website. Ofqual are describing this as a technical consultation. So they've moved on from the principles and they've got the policy there. The main thing that we're going to be looking at are the criteria that have been proposed in order to make the decisions for each pupil around, is it going to be a pass, a merit or a distinction? You can see the documents that we're looking at, and there is an online survey. All of those come from the web address that I gave on the previous slide. So just to reiterate, these are the policy decisions. So firstly, it was taking the spoken language out of the 9 to 1 grade and put in place flexible, and I would stress that word flexible, almost let's not make rods for our own backs on this, keep it flexible, work off the normal classroom. We'll have some common criteria that we're going to look at in a moment, and then the assessment is simply on a 3-point scale, so it's not 9 to 1. So it is very broad brush, and it does enable people to be flexible and go for the positive aspects of encouraging speaking in the classroom. And again, I've seen 1 or 2 questions in the chat. There is no requirement to provide evidence. The head of centre does not have to make the kind of statement that they had to make last time. All that they have to do is to say that pupils were given reasonable steps to have an opportunity for an assessment of spoken language for every learner. You may recall that they did say if there was a sort of a separate private candidate and so on, you may need to set a separate test, but for the vast majority of pupils in classrooms, you do it in normal lessons and make that assessment in a flexible, broad approach. And they get that assessment to be put alongside their 9 to 1 grade. The vocabulary is against a small detailed point there. Go on to the next slide. And all that the consultation asking is, do you have any comments? And are there any additional activities? So it's quite free text, but they do ask you to refer to the page in the subject level conditions. So if you are going to reply, it's worth downloading that document, which I think is around 40 odd pages, and then refer to the particular page when you're making any responses. But what we're going to do now is to have a look at the criteria in a bit more detail to give you some ideas as to what you might be thinking about. So yeah, that's the bit. Now, Stephen Fawkes, who is present here, has coordinated an excellent ALL briefing sheet. So they've condensed over 40 pages into a 5-page summary, and I've given the link there. And I saw that Krista has also given the link in the chat. Stephen, is there anything you just wanted to say at this moment about your excellent briefing paper?
Myself, yes. No, not really, except to say that what we do with these briefings is to try to make them readable for teachers who don't have time to read anything, basically. So I think what I tried to do in this one was to extract the criteria, the main focus of it. So it's got the main points about the other changes that David, you've described, but it really focuses attention on those criteria, which are the things that we're being consulted on really. Do we have comments to make on those? Obviously, it's only a briefing, and if you want to respond to the consultation, we do encourage you to do that individually as well as collaboratively with us.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you for your work on that.
And can I just say, I've just noticed people are asking about the slides. I will make sure the slides are on the AWL London website. So you'll have registered. I'll write to you tonight or tomorrow, and everything will be downloadable, because I know the slides have got the links. So,
so we're now going to have a detailed look at the criteria, and Helen's put the wording from the criteria into grids, and I'll let her take you through those.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were going to say, and also it's whether or not it's worthwhile pointing out how you get the pass, merit or distinction.
Yeah. I've done a copy and paste out of the subject level condition. So on page 18 to 19, there's quite a complex thing that you have to read through in order to understand, but we'll perhaps come back to that at the end. But at least it's there, and it's important to read it really carefully and do some sort of logic around the different categories. But there are 4 categories, and there's some criteria for each. So if I pass over to Helen to take you through, what we're going to do is look at each of the 4 categories in turn, look at what Ofqual have proposed, but in a sense deconstructed by Helen into strands, and then look at a possible, perhaps clearer version that makes it more obvious as to exactly what they're looking for. So let's start with communication and interaction, and those are the Ofqual words, but over to Helen at this point.
Okay. So again, this is just really to demonstrate the process that I use to evaluate whether I could use these criteria and whether I could explain them to pupils. Whenever I'm met with criteria which are just put together in a big lump of a paragraph, I can't help but start putting things into strands, and I'm sure loads of people do that as well. So here, this isn't how it appears in the proposals. In the proposal, you'll just have, this is what the pass is, this is what the merit is, this is what the distinction is. So in order to analyse it and see whether or not I felt this would be easy to use, just so that you can see, I've put it into these strands. And I've done that for all of the 4 sections which have been proposed. And I actually did go through this on Monday with my class. I did spend 15 minutes. I said, look, there's a proposal going on at the moment. What do you think of these? So I'm interested in them being able to understand it as well, particularly since one of the suggestions is that you share the criteria, whatever they are, with the students so they can see how they're getting on. So here's the communication interaction one. And on that one, I found it pretty easy to pick out the 4 communication or the strands there. The ones to do with communication were to do with obviously the relevance and, I made a mistake there, relevance and detail of information, the length of the response, down here, development of the response, and opinions and justification. So they're all the things that you communicate out. And the ones which are to do with the interaction are them asking questions, them adapting language for different purposes, and the level of interaction. And I'm assuming here, and I've just put this myself, that sometimes the wording is a bit of a code, isn't it? Adapt language for different purposes. Well, we're always adapting language for the purpose that we're in. And my understanding of that is it's probably saying not rote learning, it's probably being able to think on your feet. And the same sort of thing with level of interaction. The fact that the distinction is being natural, I'm assuming really means, to what extent are they spontaneous? So I just felt when I looked at that, I could then match it against what I was used to. And so that's what I've done for the communication interaction. And again, if this is helpful to anybody, this can all be available to you. What I did then was to look through it with a tooth comb and think, is there any way that I feel that this could be made easier? So when it comes to doing my response to the consultation, I'm just going to make a few suggestions. So here, for example, I'd suggest putting together the ones which are to do with communication, the ones to do with interaction, so that when you're discussing with pupils how they're getting on, you can say, look, good, you're giving me all of this information, but are you ever giving anything back? Are you ever being spontaneous? So that might be useful. and then possibly place those elements in an obvious hierarchical order. Of course, this is something that you could do anyway, even if they don't change it. I think I'd probably adapt it. And then I suppose I'd suggest making it clear what does this mean? Adapt language for different purposes. Perhaps make it more obvious what it is. I think I know what they mean, but it may be that's made a bit more obvious. Okay, so that's the first one. Next one is range of language. That one was very straightforward, and it's what I think we're all familiar with. Range is grammatical range, vocabulary range, and those wonderful tenses that we always have to do. So there I found that quite straightforward. But note it doesn't say, we haven't got now in one single task, you've got to get all 3 tenses. That of course has been the quite unnatural situation that we're often in a choreographed speaking test. So I think that's it. What did I make any changes there? Yes, I suppose it does actually say in the proposals that they will obviously assume that teachers know what is simple and what is complex because it's published in the exam specification. I think that might be useful just to draw attention to that at this point. And that way you can be saying to students, what is complex? So that if they are wanting to get to a high level, they're aware of what it is they have to show. And it was just the wording of these tenses that I felt could be made in a little bit simpler. You don't really need the word as well as. Accuracy, this was the one I didn't find as straightforward. There seem to be 2 strands. First of all, accuracy itself, are you accurate? But there they're getting the word correct and level of accuracy and accurate here as well. And then the other strand was the impact of errors on communication. To what extent does it impede communication? And I'm assuming this goes back to the old days of the sympathetic native speaker. To what extent are they going to find it difficult to understand you? So that was the one that I found a little bit more difficult, but I did understand why they had that as a separate category. So the changes that I had put there was, I suppose that I found that within the accuracy, it is really obviously going to be saying, according to whether you're using simple language, how accurate it is, and according to if you're using complex language, how accurate is it? So my suggestion is that there really is a much closer link between what it says in range and what it says in accuracy. Certainly not using a different way of expressing what is simple and what is complex. I don't think I've said that very clearly myself, but certainly getting some sort of consistency in the vocabulary used to describe what is simple and what is complex. And finally, the pronunciation. There seem to be 3 strands here to do with how understandable it is, so the comprehensibility of it. Mostly understandable, some inconsistency, overall accurate. Again, this impact of errors on communication. So perhaps that's to do with how an unsympathetic native speaker might take it. Does it hinder? If they're really trying, do they understand? But if you're not really trying, does it hinder? And then finally, the accuracy of pronunciation. That's really to do with, I suppose, if you're an English speaker, if your native language is English, how English do you sound? Or whatever your language, your original language is, does it really interfere there? So that seemed to be fairly straightforward to me. And the only suggestion that I had was making sure there's consistency in the vocabulary used when describing them. So rather than using a different way to express the same thing, they might as well use the same language of, for example, uses pronunciation and intonation that are, rather than demonstrates pronunciation, intonation, that is. Okay. So
okay. And just going back to that, it is possible, I believe, for not even to get a pass, but really, I think you should be able to encourage people to just even have a go, and then that gets them to a pass standard. But again, do look through the criteria, because there are some quite complex interactions between what it says for the different categories and what you get in each. This is our sort of penultimate slide. Just to stress that the statement by the head of centre is around the opportunity to take, rather than anything around the grading process. And this does give an opportunity for teachers to be taking a professional judgment. It's up to each school as to what consistency are they going to look for between different teachers. But again, I'd almost be urging people not to be making a rod for their own back, but to be using this as an incentive to encourage speaking, which, you know, language teaching, language learning is so much about learning to speak and communicate. So grab this opportunity to encourage speaking with some broad assessment and an endorsement at the end as an encouragement, but not a constraint, and not a rod for your own back. And I'd also like to stress it's actually formally stated in the subject level conditions that there is not to be any connection between the 9-to-1 grade of the other three elements and the speaking. So, you know, some people back in July were saying, well, what about if I've got somebody who's really good at speaking but struggles with writing and other bits? Well, this does give them an opportunity to get that speaking recognized. So you can be getting a distinction on the speaking, but quite a low 9-to-1 grade. So that opportunity is there, and there is a disconnect between what they get for the endorsement and what they get for the reading, listening, writing 9-to-1 grade. But above all, taking positive out of this, it allows schools and teachers to do what they've always wanted to do, is to be flexible, encourage speaking in the classroom, and to get pupils to be enjoying their language learning. So at this point, we'll pass back to Renee and Jane, and thank you for your for listening.
First of all, thank you so much, David and Helen, for putting this PowerPoint together, for talking us through these criteria so succinctly and clearly. And I'm sure we'll engage in some discussion now. Want to take the opportunity also, and I've asked Krista to put a link into the chat. If anyone isn't yet a member of AWL, please do consider it, because the stronger we are as an association, the stronger is our voice also with policymakers. So that'd be fantastic if you decided to join us, if you haven't yet already. And now to some of the questions, and I'm picking up the first one in terms of native speakers, those native speakers that are normally not in a classroom and may just sit an exam at the end. How do we deal with that as we wouldn't be able to do a kind of ongoing assessment?
I think they did say that there will be these exceptional cases where you may wish to set some kind of speaking assessment, but it doesn't need to be precisely like the old one. Again, it can be slightly more flexible, but again, it can be up to the school as to the most effective and safe way of doing it, because with all of these things, we do need to think around the public health requirements. But it would be possible to set up, you know, one of the, similar to how you would have done it in the past, to deal with those particular cases, or the private candidates will be another one.
Yeah.
Thank you. And another question that is appearing just now is whilst it doesn't have to be assessed all the time, obviously, and you know, we don't have to give pass, merit and distinction every 5 minutes. There's still quite a lot of criteria there to kind of assess for a group that maybe like 30 students. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've been reading some of the comments, and I'm not sure whether I did the right thing by sharing my rather manic way that I then separate out the criteria. I think if you just saw the paragraphs as they were, you would realize that it's not quite as demanding. I think that's where, you know, I've gone into that level of detail to see whether or not I feel that they are fairly written and whether or not I could make a distinction. But I think it may have given the impression that it's sort of ticking off every single one. So I think I probably made a mistake there. I might have made it look worse, much worse than it is. Whereas if you look at Stephen's nice little briefing, there you just see the whole paragraph as it is without all of that breakdown, I think.
And I've been seeing other questions asking about evidence. Ofqual have confirmed they are not requiring evidence. And I draw a parallel there with the spoken English, where they've, for this exceptional year, they've removed the requirement to have recordings in spoken English. and it's sort of a parallel process with language. It's relying on the teacher's professional judgment. And one of the other things just to think about is, to what extent can you tie this into a constructive, formative assessment, so that as you're going around the class or setting a pairs speaking task or something, you can be encouraging them, saying, well, that's the sort of thing that will be getting you a pass, or that might get you a merit. That can be used as a gentle incentive by the teacher to get a degree of participation that might not otherwise be possible. Or I saw somebody else saying, well, they just got a few pupils to do it separately. I think the key thing is to be imaginative and just find as many different ways as possible of getting the pupils to speak, and use your broad professional judgment against those broad categorizations, against the 4 separate categories. You have to get the 4 separate categories because that ties in with it. But within those 4 categories, keep it broad brush, really do.
Yes, and I think another one that's coming up is the importance of getting the message across that there is a disconnect between the endorsement and what a student might get at for the the 1 to 9 grade. There isn't meant to be a link that between the grades and the pass merit distinction.
Stephen wants to say something. I think he was waving his hand.
I was going to say, would it help for me to show from my document what they look like when they're spread out?
I'll stop sharing my screen now. You are screen sharing. Stop share.
My machine will work for me.
Although I did notice some nice comments that some people like my little grids.
Absolutely. Some people love grids. Here we are. So in the document, this is the briefing, which was on the right page, which has now disappeared. And so it's laid out like that in the Ofqual document. So there's
we can't see it at the moment, or is it just me?
No, we can't see it.
There we are. We can see it now.
Yep.
Okay, so you can see you've got the 4 headings which Helen had put into different categories, and basically it's which one of those boxes do they fit into, and then we go down obviously for the different levels. So that's the ones for the pass. Here's the ones for the merit, and here's the ones for the distinction. So it's basically which is the best box for them over the year that you're teaching them towards their GCSE exam.
And we didn't actually go into, did we, saying about, you've got the 4 categories. If you did say this, stop me, but you've got 4 categories, but they must get the communication and interaction in that category. If you want to get a we did say that.
Yeah, that was where I did the copy and paste from the criteria itself. It's quite a complex phraseology, so it's almost better not to try and summarize it.
Well, we could. So I'm sure we can understand. I don't know.
I'd strongly.
All right.
All right. So
basically, communication, interaction, that's the most important thing. But the good news is that you could perhaps be distinction for communication and interaction. If your accuracy is not very good, is less good, if it's in the merit one, you can still get a distinction. And I think that's the good news, is that you don't have to
got distinction on the other two.
Yeah, so distinction on the others, but you can slip on one of them and still get the higher. Yeah. It's defiant of you, wasn't it?
But I say there's some anxiety coming through in some of the questions, but I think it just goes back to that broad brush assessment as you can go around. If you can't go around the classroom, then think about ways of getting the pupils to be coming to the front. Sorry, Jane and Rennie, I've sort of...
Yeah, David, there's one question from Mary Heath about, would we need to expect students to show all 4 criteria at all times, or might they show different elements at different points?
It's an overall assessment of each of the 4 categories, and that's across the next 12 months, the next 6 months of teaching, your best fit judgment of that pupil across a range of lessons.
Yeah.
How would you best describe that pupil's communication interaction? Best, just think of that notion of sort of best fit without getting too hung up on the detail. And there isn't anything like the sort of grading issues that we've had previously. Just sort of in your mind, getting that best fit idea for each of the 4 ones.
But communication interaction is the key one. It must meet.
It must be at least
Must
that,
be
yeah.
at least the communication and interaction. I think that's the answer perhaps for you, Laura. So if the communication interaction is pass, they can't get a merit.
Yeah, and somebody as far as the 1 to 9 grade is concerned, that's allocated by the exam board off the exams that are taken in June. There'll need to be some process in May or whatever where, just like with the spoken English, the teachers will submit a grade. Will submit a level for the endorsement. They'll need to submit pass, merit or distinction for the endorsement in modern languages, just as they will be doing for English.
And it's possible if the communication grade basically could be higher, like a merit, and could be moving it if one other was going to be a pass, for example.
Yeah, I say you do need to look really carefully at the wording on pages 18 and 19 in the subject level conditions, because there's a little twist in the tail around the 4th of them, and you almost need to sit down with a little grid and write, well, if you got this for that, that for that, what do you end up with? And it may be that actually one of the useful things to come out of this, I think, might be for us to put a little grid together that said, for each of the 4 categories, if you got pass, merit, distinction, what would you end up with overall? I think actually that almost to cut through any questions on that at the moment, I think if we commit to producing that little grid, I think that will make life easier for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, David, because one of the things that's coming out here that's worrying me a bit is teachers, what you said, creating a rod for their own back. We do need to be flexible and look at this in a slightly different way, rather than, by default thinking we've got to have a speaking test as in the, or several speaking tests over the year. That's not what this is meant to be about. Yeah. And the other question that flashed past some while ago is, do we know when the results of this consultation will be published by Ofqual so that colleagues have the final version of the criteria?
They were hoping to get it out as quickly as possible, and because it's just on languages rather than all of the subjects, I would hope that they would be able to get it out quickly. That's why they've only had it's only a 2-week window for the
for consultation. Yeah.
So I think they would be hoping to turn it around as quickly as possible. So I'm guessing sometime in November, but I'm guessing there. But I think you and Rene were in touch with Rianne. And I think
my understanding is that they've got this team ready to analyze the consultation documents from the 27th onwards. So it will be done fairly quickly.
Yeah.
Thanks.
One interesting question here is from Katie Williams about role play, photo cards, etc. If one uses those, would they be still allowed to take notes, for example? Does everything have to be spontaneous?
No,
it's up to you.
No, when you look at it for communication interaction, you've very definitely got different ideas. One thing can be done to see, can they communicate it and it's prepared, or no, doesn't say anything about that. And it's over the months that we've got with them. And I would say also, I know my kids from between September and March. I've got marks, I know how they were getting on, so I have got some idea there. But I think I do understand that I have seen, I do understand we're so used to, aren't we, this idea of whether you're allowed notes or not notes. But I would say even just reading aloud something will give you some evidence as to what their pronunciation is like, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's that picking up for each of the different ones. What are the ways in which you can gain evidence from the pupil around that? I saw a question somebody's asking around the English. Perhaps I'd just clarify, the English will still be the pupils will be having to do a presentation, but previously that presentation was recorded. It won't be now. So the English is different from the languages in the way that it is being assessed, whereas the languages is very definitely normal classroom across the year, whereas the English will still be a particular moment, but it won't be recorded in the same evidential way as previously. And again, as far as standardization is concerned, that's a question for the school. To what extent do you want to be very tight across teachers? You know, there's some judgments to make there in terms of messaging and so on. That there is no external stipulation. I think that's something for each school to make a decision on, as to that balance of, with all the pressures that are on teachers at the moment, how much extra work can you reasonably be doing to achieve that, and particularly if you can be doing it in a formative way with the students, they can almost be understanding why they are getting, you know, the pass, the merit distinction in each of the 4 categories, so that by the time you get through to May, that they will be very clear of, you know, what level are they at in each of those four categories. And if you do that, then that will cut through any issues around why did I get the grade that, or why did I get the level that I've been allocated.
And that, I think, was the suggestion given by Rhiannon, wasn't it, in answer to the question about what would happen about appeals if there's no evidence. And I think her answer was, well, actually, if you have shared it with the students beforehand, that at least would be not such a surprise.
Yeah. And Ofqual are definitely saying this is over to teachers to take those judgments based on what they're seeing in the classroom. And the more that pupils are aware of it, it will incentivize them to speak. And then secondly, it just cuts through any debate at the end, because if you've got those criteria and pupils are seeing what they are doing is then placing them to a certain position, you've almost cut through the whole issue there.
Yeah. There was a question around home recorded tasks. Yes, that would be obviously allowed, because you would be putting it in the kind of wider picture of performance. So if there was home recorded tasks in there that they brought along, that would be definitely worth considering as part of the wider picture.
But again, I would just stress all of this is around not creating extra work for the teacher. Yeah. So it was really just to try and allow you to have a normal classroom without having to mark lots of extra pieces of coursework or whatever. It's just that sense of what you're doing normally in the classroom, assess it, and then that's one less thing to be worrying about.
I think there's another question about whether it's worth keeping a record throughout the year, so one can accurately assess people. Obviously, but I think what's important here is that it doesn't become that kind of that every speaking task in the class becomes a kind of
absolutely
merit pass and distinction.
Yeah.
You
have to go back to, you know, internalize. Ultimately, the ideal way would be to internalize the kind of criteria and then kind of make a best fit judgment. Yeah. I mean, if I reflect on it, I suppose it's a bit like if we had to give a judgment to parents about kind of how is my child currently performing, for example, before mock exams taking place at parents' evenings, and you give a kind of general judgment of how the child is performing, and the focus here is very much on the speaking, obviously.
And it also reminded me about the old days of the national curriculum levels, where we had that awful situation where some people used to set tasks as being proof of being at a national curriculum level, and it was never meant to be that. It was, I remember having it described to me at the time, you were meant to be describing the field the children were in rather than the fences they jumped over to get into the next field. And I noticed there, somebody's just given a comment about how it's all, speaking is obviously brilliant preparation for writing. You're right.
Yeah, just reminders for home or community languages. Those home and community languages that currently have a speaking element in their exams, they obviously would also be subject to this endorsement. But as David said before, if for whatever reason, they weren't kind of following a classroom engagement, but just sat the exam at the end of the year and would use you as a center, then obviously would have to kind of set up a exam situation. There's guidance in or suggestions in the consultation document. But those language exams that currently haven't got a speaking element will not need an endorsement. Jane, have you got any other questions that you've picked out?
No, I think the people are focusing around the general things of how do I do this, and I think the thing is, you know, you've got to trust your professional judgment. You know the students. Be flexible. Don't create yourself an awful lot of extra work. We're here to support you. AWL will be providing support. Please join us if you haven't already, because you can see the kind of work we're doing, and it's obviously it's valued from the comments tonight. And you know, it's an opportunity. Take it as an opportunity. It's a creative way of assessing speaking. I'm going to mute now because my clock's going off.
Oh, that's really good. It gives us kind of it gives an indication that we're coming to an end. But I'm just giving people another couple of minutes if there are any burning questions. It gives me time to just kind of flick through the chat again. Yeah.
We can certainly have more if these are helpful, if webinars like this are helpful for people. Once we know what the criteria actually are, perhaps we can have a get together then and pool some ideas.
But yes, that's a good idea, Helen, you know, as a support. And I think one thing that it was mentioned in the chat, but we perhaps need to say again, this is only for 2021. Yeah. And if you know, things don't improve and we're still not able to go back to complete normal, Ofqual's already said there'll have to be a full consultation on what we do next. It won't automatically be carried forward. So we are dealing with exceptional circumstances, you know, in this current year.
And thank you for the lovely comments. It's really nice because I tend not to look at the comments when we're speaking, but it's nice now.
Your grid's going to be an absolute bestseller, Helen.
Yeah. If I round up, I'd like to say once again thank you to you, Helen and David, for putting this together. I would like to say a massive thank you to all of you for joining us this evening and for giving us up time and your thoughts. And I think it would be really great to kind of reconvene and then share good practice in the coming weeks and months. As soon as we have the final outcome, we obviously will share it in our usual ways. Via AllNet and Twitter and all other social media that AWL is involved in. Once again, many thanks. And if there are any other questions, please get in touch with us. Thank you. And thank you, Jane, for co-hosting.
No, that's a pleasure, Renee. And thank you to everybody for giving it your time. And I think I can confidently say that people have found it helpful, and that's really great.
And thank you, Stephen, for your briefing.
Thank you. Yes, definitely. Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody, and look forward to half term.
And another webinar tomorrow. I think Joe's got lined up. I tend not to close down the room. Normally I let people gradually leave. It's very good doing this because it's forced me to do something.
There's a question here from Cassidy about what does BC mean when applying for the membership as a teacher trainee.
I can answer that one.
Yeah.
It's the British Council. If you're a British Council scholar, you'll know what that means. That's so that's why that's there. So if somebody wants to email either the info @ or I can put my email address in here, then they can get in touch with us about membership if they want to.
I meant to sort of unmute people. How do I do that? Nice to see familiar names that we know here. People I've got to know over lockdown particularly. It's Chris Rimmer, he's been saying nice things. Hi, Chris.
Yes, Gemma, it would be NQT, wouldn't it?
No, it should say trainee, shouldn't it? Krista?
Yeah, if you're a British Council scholar, that's why you go in with the BC membership, or whether you're a trainee, and that's how it works.
But if you're not a British
really.
Council scholar, there seems to be only an NQT.
That can't be right.
No, it can't be. I agree, Stephen. Gemma, if you email me, then I'm quite happy to
it
sort
says
this
your
out
student
for you.
NQT year 1 or year 2, I think it says. Yes, that's the one for trainees.
You're a student, in fact.
No, but you're students. You're not NQTs, but you're students or trainees. Sorry.
Because
The
it's
same package for both.
It needs rewording, actually. It shouldn't say.
Yes, you're a student teacher, not a student, a PGC student.
That's right. We need to reword that.
Yeah.
Krista, could you make a note for Lottie?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Laura, you can join in.
You can talk. Unmute
Laura,
yourself.
unmute yourself.
Hello.
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 Yes,
How are
anybody can
you?
unmute. I've made
Yeah,
a signal.
everyone
Unmute
can
yourself.
unmute. Everyone can
You can
unmute and have a chat. It's that unwinding moment at the end. And so
We've got a pretty poussin. That's nice.
Thank you so much for that. It was really, really good. And Helen, your grid was really useful.
Oh,
So
thank you.
I'm going to ask for a copy of that if possible.
It was just, I saw all of these comments coming about, oh, it's so complicated. And I thought, oh, no. And I know that's why normally I think things are presented not in that way, because it's a bit complicated. But thank you very much, Laura.
but go for the broad brush.
Broad brush is what they, yes.
Broad brush, absolutely, yes.
So Helen, I promised everyone in the chat that I would ask you for a copy of your grid.
Yeah.
With the typo corrected, obviously, that I can use on the endorsement page when we get around to publishing that one.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I mean, do I put out if I put out the grid of as it is,
We'll put
should I
both
put the
out.
one, my little suggested one as well, just so people can see?
Yeah.
It's really,
Because you want to
there
launch a
was
debate.
nothing, there was nothing too controversial. It's particularly this accuracy thing where I just thought I didn't understand it really, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
But I have now understood, because I had thought you had to have range with accuracy or it wouldn't really mean anything, but I do understand their argument now that you could be very accurate.
Within a very narrow sort
Yeah,
of.
you should get credit for being accurate with narrow.
Yes.
So yes,
Yeah.
I could see that in the end, but they definitely need to have the same language as to what the type of language they're referring to. I did notice somebody mentioned about intonation, because it's in AQA, they very deliberately call it pronunciation and intonation. But I mean, intonation is pronunciation, isn't it really? Is it? I mean, I don't know if that's something we ought to say.
Yeah.
To be specific.
I think one element that we need to reflect with the exam boards is that because some of the examples have had events already, people may be confused because no one has seen those beforehand. So it's about kind of just double checking what these messages were in the exam board briefings. So
what have their briefings been about? About the proposals, or
the about of the proposal? And my understanding is that they basically had hoped that the proposals were out, but then went ahead anyway and gave some kind of ideas of how you could be. I think they were kind of anticipating what endorsement could mean and kind of explored it that way. So we just need to kind of see what type of activities they have shared, because that would be quite interesting to kind of.
oh yes, I can stop recording
Yeah.
now. I should have stopped it earlier.